Hey guys, welcome to That Florida Feeling. How's everybody this week? Have you had a good start to 2023? I hope so. I want to say thank you again to everybody who supported the podcast and interacted with the Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok pages. Side note, Facebook is still giving me problems. I'm trying to get it figured out. I've got people posting for me, mainly my husband. But, Facebook is Facebook. We're working on it. But thank you for that. I can't thank you enough for helping make this podcast successful. You guys are simply awesome, especially those of you who are participating in the Wednesday polls and questions, although some days I just ask y'all questions and see what happens. It's fun to learn about you guys. I really love the fact that you guys interact, and that's great. So I said that we would come back with some new topics, and today I want to talk to you about a time in Florida's history that changed parts of Florida through some really dark times. So we're going to go back. The year is going to be 1980, and Miami is struggling. I mean, it's Vice City, but it's struggling. The city is dealing with immigration issues, growth, and race riots. The 1980 Miami race riots started on May 18th in 1980 after an all-white male jury acquitted 4 Dade County Public Safety Department officers, which is a nice way of saying police officers, in the death of Arthur McDuffie. Now, I really didn't realize that Miami had race riots. I knew that, race riots were a thing in the 80s, but I didn't realize that Miami had its own, and it was bad. Let me talk to you about it. But first, let's talk about who Arthur McDuffie was, the man at the center of this. He was actually an insurance salesman, and he was a U.S. Marine Corps Lance Corporal, and he was a black man. He was stopped by 4 white police officers in Miami and was beaten to death after a traffic stop. The officers were acquitted on charges of manslaughter and evidence tampering. That acquit led to riots in Overtown and Liberty City in Miami, and they were bad. The riots actually lasted until May 20th, which led to 18 deaths and $100 million in property damages. And these riots were probably the deadliest urban riots since the 1967 Detroit riots and remained some of the deadliest riots until the 1992 LA riots. The riots started because of one innocent man's death, Arthur McDuffie. Arthur was 33 when he was stopped by police officers on December 17th, 1979. He was riding his motorcycle through town. Now, McDuffie had a few traffic citations against him, and he was driving on a suspended license. The initial report came that he led police on a short 8-minute chase at speeds of over 80 miles per hour. The report claims that 4 officers involved in the chase said that McDuffie had run a red light and led police on said chase. Sergeant Evans, who, by the way, was not even at the scene, had added that McDuffie had lost control of his motorcycle while making a left turn. And according to Officer Viverka, that when he did, he struck his head on the ground. But he got up and attempted to flee on foot. Officers caught up with him and a scuffle ensued. One of the officers, Sergeant Diggs, said that the subject was observed fighting violently. Police also drove over the motorcycle at the time of the incident. All of that looks very suspicious, especially since someone who wasn't even at the scene is giving accounts for it. Now, McDuffie was transported to the hospital where he died 4 days later from his injuries. McDuffie's ex-wife was actually on duty at the hospital when he was brought in for his injuries. He was brought to Jackson Memorial Hospital. The coroner's report concluded that he suffered multiple skull fractures, with one being over 10 inches long. You have to do some serious damage or fall from a good height to get that. The medical examiner, Dr. Wright, said that his injuries were not consistent with a motorcycle accident, and that if he had fallen off the motorcycle, as the police had claimed, then the gauges on the bike would not have been broken, which makes absolute sense. Wright also made the statement that it appeared as if he had been beaten to death, and they cracked his head like an egg. He said it looked like a melee. That's from the medical examiner. So even the medical examiner knows that something is absolutely wrong. Well, between that report and some other contradicting evidence, they launched an investigation. Officer Viverka was made a sworn statement on December 26th that he had actually lied in the initial report. Shocking. He had pulled McDuffie off his bike after McDuffie had stopped, and McDuffie responded by swinging at him. More officers had arrived on the scene, and Viverka said that 6 to 8 officers began to beat McDuffie with nightsticks and heavy flashlights. The change in statement led to an investigation by Captain Frank, and he made a sworn affidavit that actually led to the criminal charges against 4 officers. Officer Hanlon had later testified that he had choked McDuffie to the ground with his nightstick before he handcuffed him. Now, McDuffie is on the ground, according to Officer Hanlon, and he was restrained. 2 more officers proceeded to hit him on the head with their flashlights at least 3 times. The report stated that the blows were hard, and they left McDuffie bloody. Hanlon also added that he was the officer who drove over the motorcycle to make it look like an accident. He also gouged the ground with a tire iron to simulate skid marks, and threw McDuffie's watch in the gutter. So these officers knew they did wrong, and then they tried to cover it up. That just makes it so much worse. Officer Mayer testified that the high-speed chase slowed to 25 miles an hour when McDuffie shouted, "I give up," and stopped. Mayer reported that between 3 to 8 officers surrounded him, pulled off his helmet, and began to beat him. Mayer actually admitted to joining in. These are all sworn official statements from the police who were at that scene. The officers were facing charges and were suspended on December 27th. And had shown that since 1973, so we're talking about 1979, so since 1973, 6 years prior, they had been cited in 47 citizen complaints and 13 internal affair probes. You can't tell that they're not a problem from that? 8 officers in total were charged with manslaughter, evidence tampering, and accessory. They were all dismissed from the force, and 5 of them would actually stand trial in March of 1980. Now, Miami was already a violent place. Violent, now it was on the edge. And the presiding judge, Leonor Nesbitt, knew that if he shifted the trial to Tampa, that would cool down Miami. So that's what they did. They actually transferred it to Tampa, also in hopes of getting a better jury. The jury selection began on March 31st, 1980. And the lead prosecutor of the case was someone that you've heard of. The lead prosecutor was actually Janet Reno. Yes, that Janet Reno. The defense actually started out by stating that the police were first attacked by McDuffie. McDuffie was said to have been an ex-Marine, karate expert, and only necessary force would have worked to subdue him. The chief assistant state attorney disagreed, saying that someone beat this man's brains in. That's also an official quote from the trial. The defense also attacked the credibility of the 3 witnesses, which were Officer Viverka, Meyer, and Hanlon, because they had been granted immunity in exchange for their testimony against other officers. Hanlon was the only one in the end who took the stand, but after the testimonies, Hanlon was charged with felonies related to the case, and Viverka was charged with the civil rights violations. Meyer was the only one given actual immunity in that case. Del Toro was one of the officers, and he was actually the first to be acquitted on the grounds that the state failed to provide evidence in their case. And the rest of the officers facing charges were acquitted by an all-white male jury after only 3 hours of deliberation. When asked why they acquitted them, they said that it was inconsistent witness testimony. So these men were given a jury in Tampa of all-white males, and after 3 hours they were found not guilty. It's not a wonder why Miami exploded at that point. On May 17th, the verdict resulted in protests in the Miami streets that night, with over 500 people protesting at the downtown Miami Metro Justice Building. And the protest didn't take long to turn into a riot. And the riot spread, and three white men who were just driving home from fishing were drugged from their car and beaten to death in northwestern Miami. Another man, a butcher, was driving home that night and ran into a stone-throwing mob, which caused him to wreck, and then they set his car on fire. He burned inside of it. 23 more people were injured, some critically. A car full of white people also ran into a stone-throwing mob where they lost control of their car. They struck 2 black pedestrians, which led to everyone in the car being drug out and beaten. One of the occupants actually died from their injuries 26 days later. Miami is disintegrating at this point. People are mad. No one knows how to react to it. Those who are reacting badly. And I really can't say I blame them. I mean, I don't feel that that was a fair trial. The National Guard was eventually deployed by Florida Governor Bob Graham and sent 1,000 troops into the area, but the riots continued. 12 more people were killed and 165 injured as the violence spread to Black Grove, Overtown, Liberty City, and Brownsville in the Miami area. Fires, burglaries, and looting increased. Police actually refused to go into some areas because there were rumors spreading that there were snipers. So now, police aren't even helping. By the end of the third day, the violence declined as the city put out a curfew from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. And they stopped the sale of firearms, they stopped the sale of liquor, and they added an additional 2,500 National Guards to the area. Local police also put up barricades in part of Coconut Grove to keep people from going into the area. That was also where the snipers were reportedly stationed at. The entire city stopped, just absolutely came to a dead standstill as they tried to resume the order. Freeways were cleared from the reports of snipers, and the only people out were supposed to be the National Guard. They had to get Miami restored fast. It was actually declared a disaster area. Miami was a disaster area after the riots, and the federal government even gave funds to the city to rebuild. The Miami Fraternal Order of Police threatened to walk off the job if the acquitted officers were not reinstated. So the next day, they were given their jobs back. So it's not only Miami threatening, riots and looting and possibility of snipers. Now the police are going to walk off their job. All because, they wanted these men who were now acquitted to get their jobs back. I can't say I might not have joined in with the riots. The riots led to 18 deaths overall, 370 people injured, including children, and over 780 people arrested. The property destruction was around $100 million. The one-year anniversary of the riots passed, and a report was released that concluded, unlike the riots in 1967 and 1968, the only purpose of this riot was to kill white people. So these people were out, and they knew what they wanted. They also showed that the majority of people they arrested were not underprivileged, poor, or uneducated, and most of them weren't criminals. They were just really, really mad people. They wanted to give the criminal justice system the ability to apply itself. And they didn't, so they took matters in their own hand. The U.S. Justice Department sought indictments on the policemen for federal rights violations. Viverka was indicted, and the trial was held in San Antonio, Texas. He was acquitted after a 16-hour deliberation. Minor incidents of violence happened in Miami after that trial as well, but none as full-scaled as the full riot. On November 17th, 1981, the Dade County Commissioners agreed to a $1.1 million settlement with McDuffie's family if they dropped the $25 million lawsuit against the county. The riots changed the face of Miami. They showed that no one is above the law. The family received their money, but I'm pretty sure that they would have just wanted McDuffie back. Miami continued to be a volatile place through the 80s, with more riots and more changes happening to South Florida. I know that this is more sober than the topics I usually cover, but even Florida's dark side needs to be explored because they say that those who don't read history are doomed to repeat it. I know that Miami is still a pretty volatile place, but it's also a fun place. But we don't need to forget the people who were there before us, and we don't need to forget the people who deserve to be remembered. And I can probably say that this man deserves to be remembered, especially for what he and his family went through at the hands of, I'm going to call them stupid, some really stupid people. So thank you for listening today. No Florida Man, because I feel like we just did an entire Florida Man episode before Florida Man was a thing, because of all the stupidity the cops showed back then. All right, guys. Thank you for listening. I hope everybody has a great week. Leave a 5-star review if you don't mind. It helps get the podcast out to more people. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe if you don't want to miss an episode. Also, please share the podcast Facebook posts, Instagram posts, share them to your stories. Also, tag me on your Instagrams. Hashtag that Florida feeling so that I can share the different parts of Florida as you're in. I've gotten to know a couple of you guys really, really well just from sharing your post. And it's a lot of fun. And I really appreciate that, we can interact like that and make friends. That Florida Feeling is on all social media platforms. I already told you guys. Just check it out. Meet some other fellow Floridians or Florida lovers. You'd be surprised. You can find out new places, great places to eat, fun beaches to go to. things like that. Don't forget to drink water. Please don't forget to be nice to one another. And as always, guys, that's your daily dose of sunshine.